Hello. Have you enjoyed my earlier lecture about the behavior of the users? Now, let us go to the next step to discuss about the spatial form. Basically, whether it's architectural space or landscape space, they are bounded by three different planes. It is fundamental. But why I am discussing? The reason is that even if we are outdoor for landscape projects, we are not free from these three planes anyway. When you are in the architectural space, if you remember that in my earlier lectures I have said that the architectural space has indoor, artificial, converging or concentric, where the landscape space is outdoor, natural. The domain of the landscape space is very, very wide. So, what happens is when we try to view the space in the landscape, it goes a little out of bound. But however, whatever is the dimension, we are not free from these three planes. Basically, there are three planes. The first is the base plane, I will explain, and which is representing like floor. In a building, it is a floor. The next one is vertical plane, straight like this. In a building, it is wall. And then the third one is overhead plane. In a building, it is ceiling. You can always comprehend this if you are an architect or engineer or even of any discipline. You can comprehend this very easily with respect to an architectural space: floor, wall, and overhead plane. That makes three planes, which ultimately makes a box, which becomes an architectural space. Very correct. Now, let us look at this in elements form, in elemental form. In landscape, what happens? In landscape, what is the base plane? If you go outdoor, it is the grass lawn. What you have as a vertical plane? A fence. What you have an overhead plane? Maybe a pergola. So, things are there only in different form with different material or different elements. So, here I am trying to focus more on the landscape spaces, that the elements. It is what are the linear elements? Basically, there are two kinds of elements that we will find here. One is the linear element and another is the spatial element, okay, the space wise. Linear elements in landscapes are like roads, base plane. How do you consider what is lying in the base plane? Anything below your feet, anything below your feet. If you are the user, below your feet. Anything that goes slightly above and ultimately goes over your head, it becomes overhead plane. What happens to that space which starts with the base plane, then ultimately remains continuous and ultimately goes to the vertical plane and the overhead plane? Hybrid. It is hybrid, because you won't be able to find out really where it changed. I will just draw one sketch to demonstrate that. I am saying in architectural terms. Suppose you have a plane on which you are standing, which has a side like this and ultimately a thing like this, and a person is standing here. I can understand very easily base plane, vertical plane and overhead plane. But what happens to this? When did the vertical plane change? Base plane change to the vertical plane, and when did the vertical plane change to the overhead plane? You don't try to be critical on this, not necessary. It is not wise to be critic on this. Just for our own convenience, let us call this hybrid, no problem. I might find some element which is this, and then the vertical plane goes and ultimately comes like this, possible. I won't be trying to be critical that at which point it remained changed from this plane to this plane, no need, that is meaningless. So, idea is that if you have anything below your feet is the base plane, anything on your sides, on all four sides are the vertical plane, and anything above your head is the overhead plane. Okay. So, in that context, the linear form of the base plane is road, drains, water channel, etc. And in terms of surface, it is lawn, plaza, garden, water body, sand bed. Think of anything. I have just given you a few examples. Host of examples you can find out yourself. I did not want to clutter this with lots of examples that is available. We have lots of examples, but here these are the examples which I have picked up here. Those are the elements I have picked up here, which becomes very easily perceivable by you. Okay, that is the base plane. Let us look at this. Here it is a borrowed sketch. Why I have borrowed this? Because this is probably the best possible representation I have found. If I would have tried to re-sketch something, I would have almost fallen in the same kind of illustrations. This illustrations which I like very much and really speaks of. So, the plane which is in the under position, that means whether you are standing on a podium over this, or you are standing on a such higher podium, or you are standing on a elevated balcony or the grills, or even you are walking on a tight rope. This is linear, this is spatial, this is spatial, this is spatial. So, basically what happens is, do you walk on the water, on the canal? No. But do you sail on the canal? If you do, you are on the boat, the water is at the base. This is how you look at it. Okay. Point is, in the under position, the surfaces, screens and objects, what does it mean? Basically, you may have a very clear surface, or you may have something which is perforated, grating, gridiron, grills and all that, or you may have such podium, stage, terraces or whatever. And here tightrope, stepping stone, pedestals. Sometime I will tell you, even the bollard, top of the bollard also becomes a base plane for somebody. Now, what happens is, we have observed that people have basically who is trying to express this? The users. Users say what is the utility of this and how it is to be viewed. If somebody, you do not do it, but if somebody has walked over a tightrope, then it becomes a base plane. If suppose you are standing below and watching, then what is this plane? Overt plane to you. So, it is always with a point of reference to a person who is using. For the tightrope walker, this is the base plane, and if you are seeing from below, this is your overt plane. This is interesting, linear overt plane. I hope my point is made. Then comes the vertical plane. Elements, linear and superficial, let us see. Vertical plane elements are in linear form are tree, lamppost, bollard, signage. What does it mean? Dimensionally, the height is much greater than its other dimensions. That is not 0. I will tell you, length and width, that or the width or depth, this dimension is not 0, but the height is considerably large, where we consider this as a linear vertical element. Tree. How come tree becomes a vertical element? Interestingly, tree becomes different kind of elements. It can fit in all those kind of elements. I will tell you how, but before that let me explain this. A lamppost, okay, a bollard or whichever. Even I will tell you, this I have drawn from one side. If suppose there is a bollard here, the next bollard is here, and there is a chain hanging from here to here. This is also a vertical plane. Mind it. In our landscape, we have plenty of this. You must have seen in many places the bollard is nothing but a sphere, also a vertical plane. Only thing what matters is the scale. Signage. You have a signage here. The post becomes a vertical plane, also this becomes a vertical plane. So, essentially theoretically what it is, if you are viewing it from a particular position and if you are seeing that it is standing upright from the ground to the upper level where your eye hits, it is a vertical plane. If your eye does not hit at your eye level and it is at a very lower level, still it is a vertical plane. So, let me just try to give it that, clarify that idea. Few sections I will draw. A small hedge where your height is considerably high, vertical plane. The hedge is increased, your height is still at the same level, it's vertical plane. a wall covered with hedges and creepers, your height is still here, vertical plane. So, basically what happens is, anything that is protruding or rather upright over the ground vertically up is a vertical plane. Now, tree, how can this be a vertical plane? It is hanging on to this side by so much. How can this be a vertical plane? Imagine seeing a tree from a distance at this particular point. If you see from here, you will see a projected view of this, which will look like, now again projected view, mind it, I am drawing a projected view now, in which you will be seeing a plate of green and a stick over it, below it. This is what is the vertical plane. So, it is not necessarily geometrically how much verticality it is. Another, the hill, follow this very carefully. The hill at a distance, is it a plane? Is it a triangular plane? No, it is a three-dimensional geometry, but the thing is, when you are seeing it, you are seeing this as a plane. So, the point is, it is which plane we are referring to, the position of that particular element which is being created an image in your retina, that is it. A two-dimensional representation of an element which you consider as vertical, that is vertical plane. Scale wise, if you are very close to a narrow low height hedge, low degree of vertical plane, a slightly raised higher degree, above you is dominating vertical plane, next to this is a vertical plane. Now, if I try to give an example, notice it, I will come to when I will come to the overhead plane, but still I think this is the time I should clarify. If you are standing below a tree or away from a tree, I am drawing a human figure in a different scale, so that it becomes matching. If you stand below a tree, then which one is the vertical plane? And if you are standing away from the tree, which one is the vertical plane with respect to tree? Interestingly, if you stand here, the tree becomes a vertical plane. If you stand below, the tree becomes a overhead plane. And if you have climbed that particular tree and you are sitting at the top of this, then your tree is a base plane. Is it clear now? I hope. It is always a point of reference from which you are saying this is base, this is vertical, and this is overhead. Very, very important one, because you are creating special results in your landscape. An example here, same borrowed illustration. The surfaces may be solid, it may be screens, perforated, or it may be objects. This is what I have just tried to explain right now, that this is on the side position. So, what happens is you have four sides. So, essentially in a landscape you have one base plane, four vertical planes, and one overhead plane. That makes a space. In an architectural space, you have one base plane, four vertical planes, and one overhead plane. That makes a space. Only thing, the character differs because of the elements, because of the scale, and because of the viewpoints and the reference domain. Okay. So, here if it is surface, look, this building is a three-dimensional geometry, but to a viewer this surface projected geometry of this is the vertical plane. This wall is a two-dimensional geometry almost, with a little bit of three-dimensionality in terms of width or thickness, but to this user it is a vertical plane. Look at the foliage. Foliage has a very strong three-dimensional geometry. It may be multi-layer of trees, but when from the reference domain, it is a overall projected effect. So, you see one vertical, another vertical, another vertical. Now, if you replace all these other two verticals with the plantations, it becomes a pure landscape positions with the verticalities. And if you replace this particular vegetation with wall, it becomes a pure architectural form. That there lies the real catch of the whole thing, but fundamentally the space. Okay. How about this? Screens. What is the meaning of screening? Is a perforations. How much perforations? If suppose we would have had a fencing over here, now this fence is very simply drawn that with all vertical elements and the tree here and the tree here. This tree and this tree is not same, but this particular position you have more perforations than that. So, if suppose you stand at this particular point, you see a projected image of that. So, ultimately that is was a vertical plane. How about this? I have just given an example of the hill, you remember. I have given the example of the bollard also here or post. I have also given the example of a signage. Do you understand now? Is it clear to you? This is exactly the point, that when you are trying to create a space, don't disregard different planes that you are creating. Basically what you do is, you are creating something out of nothing. A landscape that you are trying to create is something out of nothing, and the something, as a people will say, users will say it's a landscape based on what material that you have used, and the people who will say that this is not a landscape space, it depends on that what is the kind of non natural material that you have used. Okay, now next one is the overt plane. Let us go to this. See, basically what are overt planes? Something which is above your head. If you are standing here, I have just given that demonstration earlier, I am just reiterating it, that you are standing here, this particular line is the base plane, BP. Anything that you are seeing on this is basically vertical plane. Anything above you is the overt plane. So, examples that I have listed here: arbor, portico, pergola, canopy, tree foliage. Let me just try to draw a very quick sketch of it. Arbor is this, portico is this, pergola is this. Don't bother about the quality of sketch, because I am doing it very, very fast. Okay. Pergola is this. Okay. Canopy is almost like a portico here. Okay. Porticos generally usually will have two sides of support, and the canopy would be mostly overhangs. Okay. And the tree foliage is, as I said, this. Now see, if suppose I have a tree which is of this form, if I have a tree which is of this form, or else I have a tree which is very well designed. When I will discuss about all those vegetations, you will find an interesting discussion will emerge on these shapes and forms. But the thing is, here let us try to identify where is the overt plane. For this it is not a problem, because here we have this as the overhead which blended with this. So, if I say only this much, it is overt plane, rest is vertical plane. But here I will be citing the same example in my hybrid, because this is hybrid. Okay. And here basically this base, which will be a projected idea in the view of the users, is basically the overt plane. In this, unfortunately, we do not have any overt plane. Yes, it is there, but you do not realize it, because it is so low and you are at this height that you really do not get a chance to see where the overt plane is. Okay. And in this, what happens is, you see a plane like this. In this you have seen, in fact, I was trying to draw this in this form. This is the overt plane. So, I hope the idea of base plane, overt plane and the vertical plane is clear. Then the next, this idea now will give you that you are at this particular reference level of the base, and here is the overt plane at this point. Even a tent without any wall is the overt plane. So, actually these pictures are essentially very clear: ceiling, canopy, roof, and baldachin, or say Samiana in Hindi that we call, all these are nothing but the all sides open is overt plane. And the screens means pergola with creepers and all that. So, trellis, foliage, trellis of different kind. This is a horizontal trellis, foliage, branches, grills, etc. They are all screens, that means perforated. And the objects, like say, if you are standing on in the midst of a field and then you have an umbrella, the umbrella becomes your overt plane. If you are standing next to this particular post without the umbrella, then this particular cables become your overt plane. So, the point is, what is the strength of these planes? That depends on what material you are using and how you are using. This point has to be very, very clear in your mind. Now, the situation is that when I am planning, what am I going to do? I am going to combine all these things together. In the landscape, what happens is that you enter a space very wide. It is so wide that the vertical planes become, it is there, but not that significant. So, what happens in such kind of case is, where is the vertical plane and which one is the base plane, which one is the overt plane? Look at this very interesting point. A large, recall that Mughal gardens, Taj Mahal, the garden in front, recall that. I am sure you have seen the example in my earlier illustrations as well as from the reference you can see. And the Taj Mahal, I am not trying to draw the Taj Mahal in total correctness, because that I do not dare with this short time, but still it is okay. Now, at the edge we have vegetation. Which one is the base plane here? Base plane is this one. This particular thing is a base plane. Look at the whole plan of this, even the top of this, roof plan of this and the podium also becomes a base plane. You recollect, I think in Mughal Garden example I have given one plan of Taj Mahal. Please reopen that and see, you will understand the park, then front garden and then the mausoleum and also the guest house and other things. That makes a whole plan. So, that is entirely a base plan. So, basic base plane. So, what happens, I would try to say this in this form, that your base plane is nothing but the plan form. Keep that in mind. It will be very easy to remember, very easy to retrieve. Whenever you are making a plan, you are putting everything in that. Each element may have its own different heights, but you are looking from the top. So, your overall base plane represents your plan. When the base plane becomes different, when you walk into that particular site, not seeing in the plan form, now you have gone in, standing over there, trying to see everything in 3D, because when you are looking at the plan, it is in 2D. But when you are going into that and I am trying to see this, you are in 3D. And in 3D, then whatever was a line earlier in your base plane, the part of the plan, now stands out as the wall or the vegetation or a building or a fountain. What would be the representation of a fountain in your plan or base plane? A dot. But in 3D, it becomes a good vertical elements. Okay. In such cases, if I try to represent, look at this section. If I draw a section through this, then I do see in scale the vegetation is over here. Okay. At a distance, I am seeing the Taj Mahal with the minarets. What I am seeing here is a vertical plane. What I am seeing here is the base plane. Where lies my overhead plane? Where did it go to? Do not underestimate the role of our overhead plane here. This is the real crux of the landscape design. The entire hemispherical dome, the clouds, the sky, the blue sky is our overhead plane. If you experience that Taj Mahal, if you ever get a chance, I suggest that please go to that garden and see yourself, and at that time recollect my lectures and follow through. If you are standing in the midst of a Mughal garden, the Taj Mahal's garden, in the night, what is the color of your overhead plane? Black. In the sunny day, it's blue. In the monsoon, gray. In the twilight, scarlet orange. Means what? Your entire plane, which you are not being able to touch or do anything, is playing so much role in your entire landscape environment creation, you just can't imagine. The point is, pay attention to all these elements and do justice. I don't know whether you have seen this same Taj Mahal standing in the midst of this garden in a twilight time, early morning, or on a moonlight night. I have seen the tourists, they go there and they enjoy that particular landscape in the moonlight night, and they wait for the season so that they see it. So, what happens is, the plane is one, or set of planes are one, but the whole ambience that is created by virtue of light, season, air flow, temperature, sunshine or sky clearance, that makes the overall condition. So, when you are thinking about the planes, do not be very regimentally thinking about, oh, I have a vertical plane, I have a base plane, I have an overhead plane. No, because you are creating a 3-dimensional entity, and that 3-dimensional entity which you are offering to the users, and that 3-dimensional entity which will live there for years, and users will come to that, enjoy that particular three-dimensional entity at different time of the day, at different day of the week, at different seasons. So, things will, your whole landscape will behave differently or rather manifest differently at different point of time. This you have to really take note of. The last one which I would say in this is the hybrid plane. You recall that I had given a sketch showing you recall this, the hybrid. So, the thing is, whenever you have the ground, you have the vertical plane and you have the overhead plane, all together makes it a hybrid, and you have all opportunities to create. So, basically, I will give an example, very rudimentary landscape example for this, which will probably help you. Imagine that this is the base, and then you have a different layer of vegetations placed over here, and then at the end there are trees, okay, and then the sky over. What is the vertical plane? The projected vertical plane. Basically, the projected vertical plane is this. This is the overhead plane coming down to this, and this is becoming vertical plane, and then the base plane. This is what is a replica of this. So, you can create anything as long as you are fundamentally clear. Okay. The examples I have given. Then comes the question of form, elements in terms of form. There are few elements, or rather I would say there are different forms, linear and planar and volumetric or voluminous. Now, I would say you use volumetric as a point, as a reference. I have tried to select elements which are very much common in our landscape. In linear form, we have roads, paths, edges, margins, drains, canals, rivers. When I will discuss about the elements in different course of time, I will give examples of all these things. In fact, I am planning to give one particular assign one particular lecture on all kinds of elements to be discussed, very focused. Okay? And then the planar one, in which creeper, fence, hedge, wall, trellis, and the voluminous or volumetric ones is tree, shrubs, hedges, pots, gazebo, fountain, dune, cliff, hill, and embankment. Now, these are different forms of that particular element which ultimately contributes to our planes. What next? See, the thing is, basically what we have discussed so far is what are the different kind of spatial form. First is the behavioral issues, and then comes a spatial form. The space is created by all these planes, but there are something beyond. It is not very rudimentary saying that I have a plane, base plane, then I have vertical planes, and then I have overhead planes. So, I have just done justice by putting some elements to it. No, it is not. It is basically how people are going to react to this particular space. It depends on what is the scale of the space and what is the explicitness of the space, how explicit the space is. If I truly, if I try to correlate with whatever just now I have said, it is, if I have a situation in which this is the sky, you are standing here. Which one is the overhead plane? Where is the base plane? Okay, you will say this is base plane. Where is the vertical plane? Sky meeting the horizon, and from there it is rising and ultimately going overhead and ultimately meeting the other side of the horizon. Where is the vertical plane? Point is, when you view it, you view it with not with very rudimentary or very straightforward points. You try to understand the essence of it. And interestingly, in the next lecture that I am going to discuss for the next day, in which you will find that how we consider a space created with base of vertical and overhead planes and how explicit it is. And then I will go on. Thank you very much. Enjoy it. Any questions that you have, please write your questions in the forum so that I can always clarify further. I hope these points are placed in a manner which is very easy to understand for you by you. So, enjoy it. Thank you.